I keep going back to the morning after, not to the chapel, not to the vows I apparently said out loud in front of a stranger in a white suit who smelled faintly of cigarettes and lavender. Not even to the moment I woke up in a king-sized bed with sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, wearing a dress I didn't remember choosing, with a ring on my finger that caught the Las Vegas sunlight like it was designed specifically to blind me into a panic attack. I keep going back to the morning after, because that was when she walked in. She knocked first, which, I would learn later, was unusual for her. Margot Voss did not knock. Margot Voss had spent 31 years walking into rooms and having the rooms adjust to her, not the other way around. She had the kind of presence that rearranged furniture without touching it. The kind of quiet that made other people want to fill it, just to feel less small. But she knocked. And when I said come in, barely above a whisper, still clutching the sheet to my chest like it was going to protect me from whatever was happening, she opened the door slowly. Like she was giving me time. She was already dressed. Of course she was. Silk blouse, dark trousers, hair pulled back. Not a single sign that she had also, apparently, gotten married the night before to a woman she had been living with for 4 months and hadn't once looked at with anything other than mild, polite indifference. She was holding 2 coffees. She set one on the nightstand next to me without a word. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed. On her side, I noticed. Even then, I noticed it was her side. And she looked at me with those gray eyes that I had spent 4 months convincing myself were not interesting to me at all. And she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you say anything." I didn't say anything. She said, "I know how this looks." I still didn't say anything. She looked down at her coffee cup, then back at me. And something shifted in her face. Something I couldn't name yet. Something I would spend the next 3 months trying to name and failing. She said, "It wasn't an accident." And here's the thing I think about now, lying awake on a Tuesday night in my new apartment in a city that doesn't have her in it anymore, the thing that keeps circling back no matter how many times I try to land it somewhere and leave it there. I wasn't angry. I should have been. By every reasonable measure, I should have been furious. I was 26 years old. I was broke and barely holding together a life that had already come apart once before. I had moved into her spare room because my best friend Danny said her college friend had space and needed a roommate, and the rent was suspiciously, almost insultingly affordable. I didn't know then that affordable meant Margot Voss is paying 60% of it and not telling you. I didn't know a lot of things. But I wasn't angry. I was sitting there in a hotel room in Las Vegas with a ring on my finger and coffee going cold on the nightstand, and the woman I apparently married looking at me like I was something she had been afraid to want for a very long time. And all I could think was, how long have I been looking at her like that? 2? That's the question that doesn't leave me alone. Not the marriage, not the money, not the way it all eventually came apart, slowly, and then all at once, the way everything real seems to. Just that question. How long? If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. I should start at the beginning. Not the beginning. Not my childhood or my mother or the apartment I grew up in above a laundromat in Cleveland that always smelled vaguely of warm fabric and something burnt. Not the years I spent trying to become someone who deserved better than that, working every job I could find that would take me, putting myself through 2 years of community college and then somehow, terrifyingly, 3 more years at a state university studying graphic design because my art teacher in 11th grade told me I had a gift, and I decided to believe her because no one else had said anything like that to me before. Not that beginning. The beginning that matters is September. A Saturday in September, when I showed up at an Upper West Side address with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag and a box of art supplies I refused to put in storage because some things you keep close, and I buzzed apartment 9C, and a voice came through the intercom that was low and unhurried and said simply, "Doors open. Take the elevator." No hello. No welcome. No, I'm so glad you found the place. Just, doors open. Take the elevator. I almost left. I didn't, obviously, because I had nowhere else to go, and $1,700 in my checking account, and a graphic design job that paid me just enough to make rent somewhere if somewhere had a roommate. But for one full second on that sidewalk, I thought, this is going to be a mistake. The apartment was not what I expected. I had expected nice. Danny had told me her friend did well, which in Danny's vocabulary could mean anything from she has a real couch to she summer in the Hamptons, so I was prepared for a range. What I was not prepared for was the way the apartment felt like a curated exhale. High ceilings, white walls with one large painting per room, each one chosen with the kind of precision that told you something about the person who chose it. A kitchen with a gas range and pots hanging from a rack above the island, the kind of kitchen that made you want to know whether she actually cooked or if it was aesthetic. A balcony facing west, late afternoon light coming through the glass doors like it had been scheduled. Margot was in the living room when I came in. She was standing with her back to me, on a phone call, speaking in a voice so quiet I could barely hear individual words. Just the cadence of it. Measured. Certain. The voice of someone who had never once said something she didn't mean. She held up one finger without turning around. I stood there with my duffel bag cutting into my shoulder, and I looked at the painting above the fireplace. A large, abstract, deep blues and rust. Something that looked almost like a landscape if you stepped back far enough. And I thought, okay, she has taste. That's something. She finished the call and turned around, and she was exactly what I would have predicted from all of it. Tall, sharp features. The kind of beauty that doesn't ask for your opinion. She was wearing a cashmere sweater in a shade of green that should not have worked and absolutely did. She looked at me and said, "You must be Nora." Not a question. "I must be," I said. She almost smiled. Almost. The corner of her mouth moved in a direction that wasn't quite down. "Margot," she said, "I'll show you the room." That was it. That was our entire first conversation. The room she showed me was generous. Queen bed, a desk by the window, a closet bigger than the bedroom I'd had in my last apartment. She had put fresh towels on the bed. That detail. I don't know why it hit me the way it did. It just seemed like the most human thing in an apartment that felt almost too composed to be lived in. Fresh towels on the bed for someone she'd never met. She stood in the doorway while I looked around and she said, "I'm usually out by 7. I work late most nights. I don't have guests often. The cleaner comes Thursdays. I'd prefer you not to be here when she does." She paused. Not because of anything personal. She just works faster. "Okay," I said. "The Wi-Fi password is on the refrigerator. The coffee maker is specific. I'll walk you through it when you're settled." "Okay," I said again. She nodded once, started to leave. "Margot," I said. She turned back. "Thank you," I said. "For the room, and the towels." She looked at the towels, then back at me, as if she had forgotten she'd put them there. "Of course," she said, and she left. For 4 months, that was mostly what we were. 2 people in a well-appointed apartment who had arrived at a polite, functional arrangement and were honoring it with the kind of careful efficiency that required almost no emotional investment. She was gone before I was fully awake most mornings. Home late, sometimes past 10. She ran a fund. I learned this not from her, but from Danny, and then from a brief, accidental Google search that I shut down quickly because knowing things about Margot Voss from the internet felt like cheating at something. A private equity fund that did something with sustainable infrastructure, which I understood approximately 15% of, but which clearly required the kind of sustained mental presence that left her quiet by evening, settled at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and her laptop, not unfriendly, but contained. Contained. That's the right word. She was the most contained person I had ever shared space with. Every emotion she had appeared to arrive pre-edited, pre-approved. Presented to you only after she had already decided it was safe. except for two things. The first was the piano. There was an upright against the living room wall that I had assumed was decorative until the third Saturday I lived there, when I was eating cereal at the kitchen island at 10 in the morning in my pajamas, and she sat down at it without any announcement and started playing. I don't know what I was expecting. Something classical and correct. Something as curated as the rest of her. She played jazz. The loose, wandering kind. The kind that wasn't trying to go anywhere in particular and somehow arrived somewhere important. She played with her eyes closed, and her shoulders dropped in a way I had never seen her body do before. Relaxed, almost. No. More than relaxed. Released. And I sat there with my spoon halfway to my mouth for a very long time. When she stopped, she sat still for a moment with her hands in her lap. Then she turned and saw me staring. "Sorry," she said. "I should have asked." "Don't apologize," I said, maybe too quickly. She looked at me for a second longer than usual. Then she got up and went to make coffee and didn't say another word about it, and I sat there trying to figure out why my chest felt different than it had 5 minutes ago. The second thing was the reading. She read every night before sleep. I knew this because our bedrooms shared a wall, and if I was still awake, I could hear, very faintly, the sound of pages turning. A steady rhythm, pausing occasionally, resuming. There was something about that sound, about knowing she was on the other side of that wall, present and quiet and absorbed in something, that I found more settling than I had any reason to. I started staying up later. I didn't examine why. I should have. I know that now. I should have sat down with myself at some point during those 4 months and had an honest conversation. But there's a particular kind of willful not knowing that feels like protection when you're in it. You build a very convincing case for ordinary. You inventory all the reasonable explanations. You say, "I'm just comfortable here. I'm just grateful to have a stable place to live. I just admire her. I just find her interesting the way you find someone interesting when they're private and unusual and keep showing you unexpected small corners of themselves when they don't realize you're looking. I had an entire vocabulary of just. And then Danny called in November and said, "Okay, I need to know. On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird is living with Margot?" And I said, "Like a 3? She's actually kind of, I don't know. She's not what I expected." There was a pause. "Nora," Danny said. "What?" "Your voice did a thing just now." My voice didn't do anything. "It went soft," Danny said. "In the middle of, 'She's not what I expected.' Your voice went soft." "Danny, I'm just noting it for the record." "Noted. You're wrong." "Absolutely," she said. "Totally wrong. You're definitely not developing feelings for your extremely beautiful, extremely unavailable billionaire roommate." I hung up. But I thought about that for a long time after. The unavailable part. Not the billionaire part. The unavailable part. Because that was the thing I had been using as ballast, I realized. The thing I held on to when I noticed the piano, or the turned pages, or the way she sometimes looked at me over her coffee cup in the morning, with an expression I couldn't quite read, like she was working something out. I had been telling myself, it doesn't matter what I notice. She is the kind of person who does not get emotionally available. She has the cleanliness of someone who has decided not to need people in the way that creates mess. And I was very good at wanting things I had already decided were not possible. So I kept going to work and coming home and eating dinner across from her when our schedules aligned, which happened more often as autumn went on. And I kept waking up in the morning and hearing her already awake on the other side of the wall. And I kept telling myself, 3. Weird level 3. Completely manageable. I almost believed it. It started, if I'm being precise about it, if I'm doing the honest archaeology, it started with the Tuesday in October when I came home from work sick. Not dramatically sick, just the low, miserable kind of sick that makes everything feel slightly worse than it actually is. Sore throat, low-grade fever, The particular exhaustion of someone whose body has decided that this week, of all weeks, is the week to stop cooperating. I had worked through the afternoon trying to finish a project, and then given up around 4 and taken the subway home feeling sorry for myself, which I tried not to do as a rule because self-pity, in my experience, rarely improved anything. I let myself in with the quiet hope that Margot would be at the office until 9. She was in the kitchen. She looked up when I came in, and I must have looked exactly as bad as I felt because something shifted in her face. Quick, unguarded, before the composure reasserted itself, and she said, "You're sick." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "You're not fine," she said. "Sit down." I sat down. She did not make a production of it. She did not fuss or cluck or hover. She moved around the kitchen with the same unhurried efficiency she brought to everything, and 40 minutes later there was soup in front of me. Actual soup, made from actual things, not out of a can, and a glass of water with lemon, and something she set down next to it that turned out to be ibuprofen. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "You were going to eat cereal," she said. She sat across from me with her wine. "Not going anywhere." "I like cereal." "Not when you have a fever." I ate the soup. It was very good. I didn't say it was very good because I didn't want to make it strange, but she must have seen something on my face because the corner of her mouth moved again in that almost direction. "My mother's recipe," she said. "She made it every time I was sick as a child. I used to fake sick for it." I looked up. This was more than she usually offered. Margot Voss did not tell me things about her childhood. Margot Voss did not tell me things, generally, unless they were logistical or professional, or so abstract as to be safely impersonal. She talked about markets and architecture and occasionally books, in careful, interested sentences that revealed her intelligence and nothing else. A mother, a recipe, faking sick. I looked at her and she was looking at the table like she hadn't meant to say it. "It's really good," I said. She looked up. "Thank you." We stayed there for a while after that. She refilled my water without being asked. At some point she went and got a blanket from the linen closet and set it on the stool next to me. Not on me. Next to me. Within reach, available, but not presumptuous. And I thought, this is what she's like when she lets herself be kind. This is what happens when the composure has an opening. I thought about that blanket for days afterward. The way she put it next to me instead of on me. The calibration of it. The thought it took. Then there was November. We had fallen into a habit, loosely without ever discussing it, of watching something on Wednesday evenings. It had started accidentally, the way these things do. We had both been home and the rain was bad, and I had put something on, and she had stayed at the kitchen island with her laptop, but had gradually, over the course of an hour, migrated to the other end of the couch without either of us marking it as a movement that meant anything. By November, it was a thing we did. A Wednesday thing. She controlled the remote. I quickly learned that was not up for negotiation, and her taste ran to British crime dramas and Korean thrillers and the occasional documentary about something geological. I fell asleep twice during the geological ones, which she found amusing in a way she tried to hide. One Wednesday in November, she picked something that was not a crime drama, or a thriller, or a documentary about tectonic plates. It was a film, French, about two women in a long, slow reckoning with each other. I noticed her choose it. The slight pause before she confirmed the selection. The way she set the remote down afterward and tucked her feet under her on the couch without looking at me. I didn't say anything. We watched it. It was beautiful in the specific way that beautiful things are when they're also a little bit devastating. By the last 20 minutes, I was very carefully not looking at Margot in the same way she was very carefully not looking at me. And the apartment felt smaller than it had at the start, and the 2 feet of couch between us felt more significant than 2 feet of couch has any right to. When it ended, she said, "Good choice." And then she picked up her wine and went to her room. I sat there for a long time after. Good choice. I had not chosen it. There was the morning in December when I was working at the kitchen island. I worked from home on Fridays. And she came out of her room later than usual, past 9, which almost never happened. And she was not in her silk blouse and dark trousers. She was wearing a worn university sweatshirt, and her hair was loose, and she looked softer, less edited, more like a person than a presentation. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and looked at me, and I looked at her, and she said, "I don't have anywhere to be today." "Okay," I said. She made coffee. She had taught me her specific method by then, the exact ratio and temperature, the particular ritual of it. And she set a cup on the island next to my laptop without asking, which she had done before, but something about today felt different. Something about the sweatshirt and the loose hair, and the fact that she didn't go back to her room. She sat across from me and opened a book. We worked in silence for most of the morning. But it was a different silence than the polite, functional silence of the first months. It had a texture to it, a warmth, like a room where someone has recently been and has left the air a little different. At some point, she looked up and said, "What are you working on?" I turned my laptop so she could see. A branding project. Identity design for a small restaurant, color palette, and logo development. She looked at it for a moment with the particular focus she brought to things that interested her. "The red," she said. "Too much?" I said. "No, it's right. It's confident." She looked up at me. Like the person who made it. I felt that in a place I was not ready for. I looked back at my screen. "It's just a logo." "It's not," she said, simply. Like she knew. She went back to her book. I stared at my screen for a while without seeing anything on it. And then there was the night in December, close to the end, close to when everything would shift permanently. When I came home and she was on the phone in the living room and I could tell immediately that it was not a work call. Her voice was different, tighter. She was sitting on the couch with her spine very straight, the way people sit when they're trying not to let the person on the other end know they're upset. I went to my room, not to eavesdrop, just to give her privacy. But the apartment was not large, and her voice carried more than she knew. And I heard, in pieces, "You can't keep. I understand that, but, Mom, I'm not asking for your, because I have made a life that I am proud of, and I would appreciate it if just once." Then quiet. Then, very low, very controlled. "I'll call you when I'm ready to talk about this." She hung up. I waited 5 minutes, and then I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Not because I particularly wanted tea, because I thought she might want company that didn't require her to explain herself. She came to the kitchen doorway a few minutes later. Her face was composed, the curtain fully drawn, but her eyes were tired. I said, "Tea?" She looked at me for a moment. Something moved in her face. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." She sat at the island while I made it. I didn't ask what the call was about. I didn't offer anything. I just made the tea and set it in front of her, and sat across from her with my own cup. And we were quiet together for a while in the December dark of that kitchen, and it felt like something I didn't have language for yet. Like the inside of the trust that gets built before you know you're building it. She said, eventually, very quietly, "My mother thinks I work too much." "Do you?" I said. She considered this. "Yes." "Why?" She looked at her tea. "Because when I'm working," she said, "I know exactly who I am." I held that, turned it over. "And the rest of the time?" I said. She looked up at me, and there it was again, that thing in her face that I couldn't name. That kept appearing, and then disappearing before I could catch it. "The rest of the time," she said, "I'm less certain." She didn't say anything else. She finished her tea and said goodnight and went to her room. And I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, not drinking my tea, listening to the city outside and thinking about what it meant that the most composed person I had ever met was telling me she didn't always know who she was. Thinking about what it meant that she had told me. That was the thing that kept unraveling those last weeks before Las Vegas. Not any single moment. Not one declaration or gesture or look that lasted too long. Just the accumulation of it. The towels on the bed and the soup on the stove and the blanket within reach. The French film and the sweatshirt, and you don't have to explain it's just a logo. It's not. The tea in the December dark and the less certain, like the most honest thing she'd ever said to me, had been said without her fully deciding to say it. I was not telling myself it was fine anymore. I had stopped the inventory of just. I hadn't admitted what I was doing instead. The Las Vegas trip was Danny's idea. Danny's ideas were frequently spectacular and occasionally catastrophic, and you generally did not know which category you were in until you were already fully committed. This one she presented as a bachelorette weekend for our friend Cass, which was true, but the version she sold to Cass involved only 8 people, and the version she actually organized involved 23 people and a party bus and a bottle service reservation at a club that I could hear from the hotel lobby. I had told Margot, 3 weeks before, that I was going. She had looked up from her laptop and said, "Vegas?" "Danny's thing. Cass is getting married." "I know Cass," she said. And then something I didn't expect. "Have a good time." Not neutral. Not nothing. Something in the tone of it that I spent the next 3 weeks not examining. 2 days before we left, Danny called me. "Okay, so?" Danny said. "Funny story." I knew from the cadence of that opening that the story was going to be entirely not funny. "What?" I said. "So Margot called me." I went very still. "She called you." "She called me, and she asked if there was room for one more on the trip, and I said obviously yes because it's Margot, and also I'm nosy, and I want to see whatever is happening between you two in real time." "Nothing is happening between us." "Nora." "Danny, nothing." "She's coming to Vegas," Danny said. "I just need you to know that. Emotionally prepare. Process your feelings. Wear something nice." I did not process my feelings. I wore something nice. The flight was fine. The hotel was excessive in the specific way that Las Vegas hotels are excessive, like someone took the concept of luxury and ran it through a machine that had no understanding of restraint. Our rooms were on the same floor, not adjacent, but close, which I noted and immediately told myself not to note. The first night was the bachelorette itself, which was loud and warm, and exactly the kind of sprawling, affectionate chaos that comes from a group of women who like each other and have found a temporary permission structure in another person's happiness. I drank more than I meant to. I danced more than I usually did. At some point, I looked across the room, and Margot was standing near the bar, and she was watching me. Not staring, just watching. The way she occasionally watched me at the kitchen island over her coffee cup. The working something out expression. I looked away first. I always looked away first. The second night was supposed to be quieter. A smaller group, Danny and 2 of Cass's other friends and Margot and me, dinner at an actual restaurant with actual food and a reasonable noise level. Except that Danny's idea of quiet included a bar afterward, and the bar had live music, and the live music had a particular quality that made it hard to leave. The kind of jazz that felt like a slow conversation in a language you almost but don't quite understand. Margot ordered whiskey, the real kind, neat. She sat next to me in a booth, and the booth was not large, and I was very aware of the distance between her shoulder and mine, which was not large either. "You dance," she said. "Last night, I was drunk." "You still dance." She was looking at the band. "I didn't know that." "There are things you don't know about me," I said. She looked at me then, slow, direct. "I know," she said. I didn't know what to do with that. I picked up my drink. "Do you? Dance?" "No." "Is that a choice or an inability?" "Inability," she said. "I've tried. It requires a certain willingness to be uncontrolled that I find difficult." "You're controlled on purpose?" She was quiet for a moment. "Mostly." "What's the part that isn't on purpose?" She looked at me again, longer this time. "This," she said, very quietly. The word sat between us. I think my heart stopped for approximately 1 second, then resumed, faster than before. I said, "What does that mean?" She looked back at the band. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm still working it out." We stayed there for a long time after that, not saying much. The jazz kept going. The whiskey was warm. And I thought, if I were braver. If I were the kind of person who walked toward things instead of making a very convincing case for staying still. If I could reach across 2 inches of booth and... I didn't. Of course I didn't. Because I had spent 26 years being very precise about not wanting things I couldn't be sure of. And I couldn't be sure of this. I didn't know how to be sure of something I had never let myself fully look at. We went back to the hotel. I do not have a clear account of what happened next. I have fragments. Impressions. I remember the elevator. I remember the hallway. I remember Margot asking if I wanted a nightcap from the minibar in her room, and me saying yes without thinking about it. I remember her room was larger than mine and darker, the curtains mostly closed and the city light coming through the gap like something out of a film. I remember we talked for a long time, about things I don't normally talk about. My mother, the laundromat smell, the art teacher who said I had a gift, the particular texture of wanting a life you don't know how to want correctly yet. She listened the way she always listened, fully present, uninterrupted, like what I was saying mattered more than what she was going to say next. And I remember thinking, who taught her to do that? Who taught her that kind of attention? I remember her voice getting quieter as it got later. I remember, there are hours I don't have. What I have is the morning after, the king-sized bed, the ring on my finger catching the light, and then the knock on the door. And then Margot with 2 coffees, setting one on my nightstand, sitting on her side of the bed and saying, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you say anything." She told me there was a chapel, that we had found it at some point in the early morning, the 2 of us, and apparently a conviction she didn't try to describe as anything other than what it was. She said the person officiating it was licensed. She had checked. She had actually already checked. By the time she was knocking on my door, she had already checked. And that the marriage was legally valid in the state of Nevada. She told me she was not drunk when it happened. Not fully sober, but not drunk. She told me she had wanted to. She said it like she was not sure what would happen after she said it, but she had decided that the not saying was no longer something she could afford. I know you didn't plan this," she said. "I know I put you in a position that wasn't fair, and I will do whatever you need, whatever makes sense, legally, practically, whatever you need." I looked at the ring. It was simple, more elegant than anything I would have chosen for myself. The kind of choice that knows you better than you know you. "Did I choose this?" I said. She was quiet. "The ring," I said. "You said you wanted something that wasn't trying too hard," she said. I looked at her. "I said that. You said, I want something that isn't performing." A pause. "I thought about that for a long time after you said it." We looked at each other across the morning. And here is what I should tell you. I should have asked for time. I should have said, "Let me think." I should have done the thing I always did. which was construct a very careful argument for patience and space, and not running toward something before I could see where the ground was. Instead, I said, "Tell me one thing." She waited. "In 4 months," I said. "All of it. The soup and the blanket and the film you chose. Tell me how long it was like that for you." She didn't look away. "Since the first Saturday," she said. "The piano," I thought. The piano. Since the first Saturday, when she sat down and played with her eyes closed and her shoulders released, and I sat there with my spoon halfway to my mouth and felt something shift. "The towel's on the bed," I said. Her mouth moved in that almost direction. "I put them there 3 times, she said. "Before you arrived. I kept changing my mind about the color." I exhaled. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she repeated carefully. "I'm not walking out of here," I said. "I just need you to know that. I'm not running from this." Something happened in her face that I had not seen before. Something that opened. "Okay," she said again, softer. We sat there in the Las Vegas morning with 2 coffees and a ring on my finger that she had chosen because I said I wanted something that wasn't performing, and the city outside was bright and indifferent and we were very small inside of it. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like something beginning. It should have been. I think sometimes it could have been. But before I tell you what came next, if you've made it this far, then you know exactly the feeling I'm talking about. That specific terror of wanting something so much you almost talk yourself out of it. That moment right before the honest word, when everything in you says, "Wait. Be careful. You could survive not having this." If that hit somewhere real, hit the like button for me. It helps more than you know. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit the bell, so you don't miss the next story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever talked yourself out of something before you even tried? Or are you the kind of person who reaches first and figures it out after? Tell me. I read everything. And where are you watching from? Drop your city. I'll reply with a heart. Okay. Back to what happened after Las Vegas. We came back to New York married. I want you to sit with how strange that sentence is. We came back to New York. Married. To each other. Carrying our regular luggage and our completely irregular situation through JFK on a Sunday afternoon, like 2 people who had something to figure out. Which we did. Which we absolutely did. In the Uber back to the apartment, she sat beside me and we didn't touch. But her hand was close to mine on the seat between us in a way that felt deliberate, and the city came back into view through the window. The familiar grid of it. The buildings I had learned to orient myself by over the past 4 months. And I thought, this is the same city. Everything is the same. Except. We went home. We ordered food because neither of us was ready to cook, which turned out to be significant. The first domestic decision of our marriage was Thai takeout, which I found both mundane and overwhelming. We ate at the kitchen island, and she opened wine and we talked. Really talked for the first time, without the careful management of what we were, without the effort of maintaining an appropriate distance. She told me about her mother, the real version, not the fragment from the phone call. Her mother who had wanted her to be one particular kind of woman and had spent 31 years handling the fact that Margot was a different kind entirely. The tension that lived in that space. The years she had spent making herself so impressive professionally that the question of who she was personally almost didn't have room to breathe. I told her about the art teacher, the whole story this time. The day she held up my sketchbook in front of the class, which I had wanted to die of, and said, "This girl sees things other people walk past," and the way I had replayed those words for years afterward like a compass. "You do," Margot said. "Do what?" "See things." She looked at me steadily. "I noticed it very early. You look at things like you're trying to understand them, not just observe them." I didn't know what to say. "Most people observe," she said. You're trying to understand. I said, very quietly, I've been trying to understand you for 4 months. She smiled. A real one. The first full, unreserved smile I had seen on her face, and it rearranged everything. How's that going? She said. Slowly, I said. But I think I'm getting somewhere. For 3 weeks after Las Vegas, it was beautiful. Not dramatically beautiful. Not the kind of beautiful that requires a score and a montage. Quietly, domestically, undeniably beautiful. She started coming home earlier. We cooked sometimes. She was significantly better at it than me, which she was gracious about, though I caught her redoing my knife work more than once. We watched things on Wednesday and also some other nights, and she stopped sitting at the other end of the couch. Just moved, gradually, without making it a moment, until we were watching things side by side with her feet tucked under her and my shoulder warm against hers. She played piano on Saturday mornings, and I sat at the kitchen island and listened openly, not pretending to do anything else. And she played knowing I was listening, which changed the way she played. It got warmer somehow. More conversational. Like she was playing to someone instead of to herself. I stopped bracing for the edges of her. She stopped performing the absence of edges. And there was a night, in the 3rd week, when we had gone to bed on our respective sides of our respective rooms, and I was lying in the dark, unable to sleep, the way I sometimes couldn't now, more awake than I wanted to be, and I heard her moving on the other side of the wall. Then I heard her stop. Then, very softly, a knock on our shared wall. I didn't think. I knocked back. A pause. Then through the wall, her voice. Quiet. Not distressed. Just, can't sleep either. No, I said. Another pause. Okay, she said. Good night, Nora. Good night, I said. And I lay there smiling at my ceiling for a long time. That was the thing I held on to. Later. When things got complicated. When the parts of this that were real had to reckon with the parts that were structural and enormous and not simple at all. I held on to the knock on the wall. The 2-word exchange through the plaster. The way she said goodnight, like it was something she had permission to mean. Because here is the part I have been circling. The complication did not come from us. It came from the outside, the way complications usually do when something is new and soft and not yet ready to be looked at too hard. It came from Margot's world, which was large and visible and had opinions about things like who she was seen with and what that implied for the fund and for the investors, and for the particular architecture of a life she had built very precisely to be both successful and uncomplicated. Her attorney called, about the marriage, the legal dimensions. Her board chair, a woman I had never met but whose name I had heard, called Margot directly. I wasn't there for the call, but I was home and I heard it anyway, the same way I'd heard the call with her mother. Same posture, same careful control. After she hung up, she came and stood in the kitchen doorway. I was at the island. I looked up. She said, "The board is concerned." I put down what I was holding. "About what?" I said. "About a sudden marriage, to someone they don't know, under circumstances that are—" She stopped, started again. "There are people whose confidence I need for the fund to function, and some of those people have old ways of thinking about what personal stability looks like." I looked at her. "Margot," I said, "what are you saying?" She looked exhausted in a way I hadn't seen before. Not tired. Exhausted. The kind that comes from being 2 different people for a very long time. "I'm saying," she said slowly, "that I may have to make some choices about how to handle this publicly. That may affect how things look between us." "How things look," I said. Nora, I'm not saying I want to go backward. I'm saying there are forces. I grew up above a laundromat," I said. Quiet. Not angry. Not yet. "I have never had a board. I have never had investors. I have $1,700 more than I had when I moved in here. and a job I like, and no particular status to protect. I am aware that my world and your world are not the same world. She looked at me. I know that, she said. Do you know what it sounds like from mine? I said. She didn't answer. It sounds like I'm the thing that needs to be managed, I said. The circumstance that requires damage control. That is not. I know it's not what you mean, I said. I believe you that it's not what you mean. But I need you to understand that I can't be someone's quiet. I can't be the part of your life that lives in the private and doesn't get to be real in the public. I know that world is real, and the pressures in it are real. I'm not dismissing any of that. But I can't. She was very still. I know, she said. Then what are we doing? She didn't answer for a long time. And that was the moment. Not the conversation that came after. Not the actual decision. But that moment. Where I understood that the thing between us, which was real and becoming more real by the day, was also sitting inside a structural impossibility that neither of us had the power to simply choose our way out of. She had built a life around a version of herself that had no room for what I needed her to be, and I could not fit myself into the negative space of someone else's carefully managed existence. Not again. I had done that before, in smaller ways, in other contexts, and I knew what it cost. What it cost the relationship and what it cost me. Specifically, the particular slow erosion of being the thing that doesn't get to be named. We had 3 more conversations over the following 2 weeks. Each one was honest. Each one was harder than the last. She told me about the life she had built and what it had required of her. And I heard in it something I recognized from the December night in the kitchen. The particular loneliness of someone who knows exactly who she is when she is working, and is much less certain about everything else. I told her that I thought she was braver than she had decided to be. She was quiet for a very long time after that. Maybe, she said, but not yet. Not yet. 2 words that could mean anything. 2 words that told me everything. I found an apartment in Brooklyn. A friend of a friend. Sublet. 2 months minimum. Long enough to make a decision. I did not make it dramatic. Neither did she. We were both, I think, too real for drama by then. We had moved through all the grief before the ending, the way sometimes you do when something is coming and you both know it and you spend the last weeks loving it anyway, knowing. I told her on a Wednesday morning. She was at the kitchen island with her coffee. The particular ritual of it, the exact ratio, the temperature, the things she had taught me. She looked up when I came in and she saw my face and she set the cup down. I found a place, I said. She nodded, slow. In Brooklyn, I said. It's small. It'll be fine. Of course it will, she said. Quiet. No qualification. I sat across from her. We looked at each other across the island. I want you to know that I don't regret any of it, I said. The 4 months, Las Vegas, the 3 weeks after. I don't regret any of it. Something moved in her throat. I don't either, she said. I think you're going to figure out what the rest of the time feels like, I said. Not just the work. I think you're going to figure out who you are when you're not performing the certainty. She looked down. Not yet, she said again. Softer this time. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to have figured it out already. I'm just telling you I think you will. She looked up. Will you? She stopped. Started again. When I do, will you tell me it's too late? Or will you just tell me what you actually think? I looked at her for a long time. I'll tell you what I actually think, I said. That's always been the deal. She reached across the island. She didn't take my hand. She just placed her hand near mine, the way she had once left a blanket within reach on the stool beside me, not presuming. Available. I put my hand over hers. We stayed like that for a moment. Then I got up and went to pack the things I had accumulated in 4 months of living in her apartment, which were more than I'd arrived with. A plant she'd given me in November, a book she'd pressed into my hands in December, a ceramic mug from the farmer's market that she'd bought without explaining why and left outside my door one morning. I packed the mug carefully. She did not help me pack. That would have been too hard for both of us. She walked me to the door. I had 2 suitcases and the duffel bag, same as when I'd arrived, plus a box of art supplies and the small potted plant, and she held the door open and we looked at each other and she said, "The ring." I looked down at it. I had worn it for 3 weeks. "Keep it," she said. "It's yours. It was always—" She stopped, tried again. I meant it. When I chose it, I looked at the ring on my hand, then at her. "I know," I said. She closed her eyes for one moment, opened them. "Goodbye, Nora," she said, "the way you say goodbye to something you know the shape of." "Not forever," I said. She almost smiled. "No," she said, "not forever." I took the elevator down. I did not cry in the elevator. I cried later, in the new apartment in Brooklyn that smelled like someone else's life and had a window that faced a fire escape, and I sat on the bare floor, and I cried the kind of crying that isn't grief exactly, because grief is for things that are gone, and this didn't feel gone. It felt suspended. It felt like a question that was still asking itself. The ring is on my nightstand now, not on my finger, on the nightstand where I can see it, where it catches the morning light through the fire escape window and reminds me of the other morning, the Las Vegas morning, the one where she walked in with 2 coffees and sat on what was already her side of the bed and said, "I know how this looks. I know how this looks." I think she was the only person who has ever known how anything looks to me before I did. And in the week since I moved out, I have been different in small ways I'm still cataloging. I finished a project I had been afraid to pitch, and pitched it, and got it. I called my mother, which I had not done in 4 months, for reasons I had made into a wall I now put a door in. I started going to a jazz place on Thursday nights, just to listen, just to sit in that particular warmth of music that isn't trying to arrive anywhere and does anyway. I think of her when I'm there. I think, she would like this. I think, not forever. I think about the blanket on the stool. The towels she changed the color of 3 times before I arrived. The way she said you don't have to explain it. It's not just a logo, it's confident, like you. I think about the morning she played piano for the first time. Eyes closed, shoulders down, the loosest version of herself I had seen. And how I sat there with my spoon in the air and felt something shift in my chest that I spent 4 months pretending was ordinary. It was not ordinary. None of it was. And I am not the same person who showed up with 2 suitcases and stood on that sidewalk thinking, this is going to be a mistake. She changed that. Not by staying, by showing me what I could feel, by being honest enough about her own edges to make me honest about mine. That's what the real loves do, I think. Even the ones that don't get to stay. They make you harder to fool. They make you less willing to call ordinary the things that are not ordinary. They leave you with a higher standard for what counts as enough. She is the reason I know what enough actually feels like. And someday, not yet, maybe, but someday, I think she's going to knock. And I am going to answer. Not forever. That's what I told her at the door. And that's what I hold on to on the nights when the city is loud and the apartment is quiet and the ring is on the nightstand catching light from a fire escape that leads nowhere in particular. Not every love story ends with the ending we planned for it. Some of them end at the door of an apartment you're leaving with a hand placed near yours like a blanket left within reach, not taking, just available. Just saying, I meant it. I still mean it. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes the love that transforms you is the one that teaches you what you're worth before it figures out how to stay. If this story stayed with you, if some part of it sounded like something you know from the inside, write Saudade in the comments. Hi. So I know you made it all the way here with me. And if you want to keep going, if you want another story that reaches in and holds something real, click the video on your screen right now. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.